grand hall smelled of old wood and expensive wine, a combination that made my stomach turn. Or perhaps it was the weight of 100 eyes on me, assessing, dismissing, looking through me as if I were made of glass. The annual summit always felt like this. Suffocating, pretentious, a gathering where alliances were forged and the weak were identified and discarded. I stood near the marble column at the edge of the ballroom. My pale blonde hair swept into a simple twist that my mother had insisted made me look presentable, though I knew what she really meant. Forgettable. Appropriate for someone of my station. The chandeliers above cast golden light across the polished floors, and everywhere I looked, I saw power. Alphas move through the crowd like apex predators, their presence commanding attention without effort. Their mates clung to their arms, draped in silk and confidence, their laughter bright and effortless. I wasn't one of them. I was here because my pack required it, because even the lowest-ranking members had to show face at the summit to prove we still existed, still mattered. But I knew the truth. I was invisible. My fingers traced the rim of my untouched champagne glass. The bubbles had long since gone flat, much like my hopes for this evening. Across the room, I could see members of my own pack, Delta, mostly, a few Gammas, clustered together, their conversations animated, but their eyes wary. We were the smaller delegation, the one that other packs whispered about. Struggling, weak leadership, declining numbers. I'd heard it all before. Felt the shame of it settle into my bones like winter cold. Still hiding in corners, I see. The voice came from beside me, and I didn't need to turn to know it was Cassandra. She moved into my line of sight, her dark hair perfectly styled, her dress the color of fresh blood. She'd always had a talent for making me feel small, even when we were children. Now, as the daughter of our pack's beta, she wielded her status like a blade. "I'm not hiding," I said quietly, keeping my voice even. "Just observing." "Observing?" She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Is that what you call it? Clara, darling, you've been standing in this exact spot for an hour. People are starting to wonder if you're part of the decor." Heat crept up my neck, but I forced myself to meet her gaze. "I'm sure people have more important things to wonder about. Do they?" Cassandra's smile sharpened. "I suppose you're right. After all, why would anyone notice you?" She leaned in, her perfume cloying and heavy. "I heard your mother tried to arrange a match for you with the Riverside pack. They declined. Again." The words landed like physical blows, but I'd learned long ago not to let Cassandra see me break. My mother had tried, 3 times now, to secure some kind of future for me, to find a pack that might accept a woman with no notable bloodline, no special gifts. Nothing but a stubborn heart and a tendency to care too much about the wrong things. "I'm not interested in arranged matches," I said, proud that my voice didn't shake. "Of course not. How convenient." Cassandra's eyes glittered with malice. "Though I suppose it's easier to pretend you're being selective when no one's actually selecting you." She drifted away before I could respond, leaving me alone again with my flat champagne and the crushing weight of my own inadequacy. I wanted to leave, to slip out through the garden doors and breathe air that didn't taste like failure. But leaving early would only confirm what everyone already thought, that I didn't belong here, that I was too weak, too broken, too nothing to matter. My mother's words echoed in my mind, a memory from years ago when I was still young enough to believe in fairy tales. We'd been sitting in our small kitchen, and she'd been mending one of my father's old shirts. He'd been gone 3 years by then, lost in a border skirmish that our pack never spoke about. "Clara," she'd said, her needle moving in steady rhythm, "you have a gift for seeing people, really seeing them. Not what they show the world, but what they hide. That's rare. That's valuable. Don't let anyone convince you it's not." I'd held on to those words like a lifeline, even as the years proved that seeing people's pain didn't make me valuable. It just made me vulnerable. It made me care when I should have stayed distant, made me reach out when I should have protected myself. It had left me with a collection of scars that no one else could see, wounds that ached in moments like this. The music shifted, becoming slower, more deliberate. Couples moved to the center of the floor, and I watched them spin in practiced elegance. That's when I felt it. A change in the air, a sudden tension that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Conversations faltered, Heads turned. Even the orchestra seemed to play more quietly, as if the room itself was holding its breath. He entered from the north entrance, and I understood immediately why silence had fallen like a curtain. The Alpha King. I'd never seen him in person before. Few had. He kept to his territory in the northern mountains, ruling over the largest and most powerful pack in our world with an iron fist and a reputation that made even the bravest alphas nervous. Rumors surrounded him like smoke, that he'd killed his own father to take the throne, that he could shift faster than thought, that his eyes could see through any lie. Looking at him now, I believed every whispered story. He was tall, broad-shouldered, moving through the crowd with the casual grace of someone who'd never had to ask for anything in his life. His dark hair was longer than fashion dictated, touching his collar, and his face could have been carved from stone, all sharp angles and harsh lines. But it was his eyes that caught me, even from across the room, dark. So dark they were almost black, and absolutely cold, empty. Like looking into a winter lake and seeing nothing but your own reflection staring back. People parted for him automatically, their deference absolute. Pack leaders who commanded hundreds bowed their heads. Alphas who'd never submitted to anyone stepped aside, and he noticed none of it, or if he did, he didn't care. His gaze swept the room with the disinterest of someone surveying furniture. Cataloging but not engaging. I should have looked away. Should have blended back into my corner, and let him pass through my line of sight like everyone else. But something held me frozen, that same quality my mother had named. That curse of seeing too much. Because beneath the ice in his expression, beneath the carefully constructed wall of indifference, I saw something else, something that resonated with a hollow place in my own chest. Loneliness. Not the temporary kind that comes from being alone on a Saturday night, but the bone-deep variety that comes from being surrounded by people and still feeling utterly isolated. The kind I knew intimately. Our eyes met. It lasted only a second, maybe less, but in that heartbeat, I felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the low cut of my dress or my unremarkable status. He saw me. Actually saw me, not through me, and the intensity of his gaze made my breath catch. Then he looked away, dismissing me as quickly as he'd noticed me, and the moment shattered. I released a breath I hadn't known I was holding. "The king has arrived," someone murmured nearby, the words carrying the weight of obvious statement. The summit's true purpose could now begin. Political maneuvering, alliance negotiations, all the games that powerful people played. I was grateful to be irrelevant to all of it. The evening wore on. I made the required small talk with pack members who tolerated my presence but didn't seek it out. I smiled at appropriate moments, nodded during boring speeches, and counted down the minutes until I could reasonably excuse myself. The king had disappeared into private rooms with other pack leaders, conducting whatever business kings conducted, and I'd successfully avoided any more encounters with Cassandra. I was considering making my escape when the doors burst open, not the grand entrance doors, but the side ones that led to the gardens. 3 men strode in, and the energy they brought with them was wrong. Sharp, aggressive, threatening. They weren't dressed for the summit. Their clothes were practical, dark, designed for movement and concealment, and the way they scanned the crowd sent alarm bells ringing through my instincts. Hunters. The word formed in my mind with absolute certainty. I'd never encountered them personally, but I'd heard enough stories. Humans who'd learned about our existence and decided we were monsters that needed to be eliminated. They were rare, usually disorganized, more nuisance than real threat. But these 3 moved with military precision, their hands positioned near weapons I couldn't quite see. They were searching for someone. The crowd's chatter continued, oblivious. The music played on. Most people hadn't even noticed the newcomers, too absorbed in their own conversations and politics. But I noticed. And as one of the men's eyes locked onto me, then moved past me to fix on someone, behind me, my blood turned to ice. I turned slowly. The Alpha King stood alone near the terrace doors, his back partially to the room as he gazed out at the gardens, unguarded, isolated, the perfect target. Everything happened in slow motion and too fast at once. I saw the hunter's hand move toward his jacket, saw the intent written clearly in his expression, saw the distance between him and the king. too far for me to cross, too close for the king to escape if he didn't know the danger was coming. My body moved before my mind caught up. I crossed the distance to the king in stumbling steps, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. I had no plan, no strategy. Just a blind instinct that screamed I had to do something, had to warn him, had to... "You're in danger." The words left my mouth in a whisper as I reached him. My hand finding his arm, the contact sent a shock through me. His skin was warm through the fabric of his shirt, solid and real, and the power radiating from him made my wolf whimper in submission. But I didn't let go. He turned to face me, those black eyes fixing on me with surprise that quickly shifted to something harder. "What?" "Pretend I'm your husband," I whispered urgently, stepping closer, into his space in a way that was completely inappropriate and absolutely necessary. "They're hunting you. 3 men, side entrance. Don't look. Just, please. Trust me." For a heartbeat, I thought he'd push me away. Thought he'd dismiss me as crazy or attention-seeking. But something in my face, in my voice, must have convinced him, because instead of shoving me aside, his arm came around my waist, pulling me against him with a force that stole my breath. "Play along," he murmured, his voice so low only I could hear it. Then, louder, for anyone watching, "There you are, darling. I wondered where you'd gone." His hand splayed against my lower back, the touch burning through the thin fabric of my dress. To anyone observing, we looked like a couple having an intimate conversation, a king with his queen, nothing unusual or alarming. But I could feel the tension in his body, coiled and ready. Could sense him tracking the threats I'd warned him about without turning his head. "How many?" he asked, his lips near my ear, the position allowing him to survey the room over my shoulder. 3. Dark clothes, armed. My voice shook despite my best efforts. "They were looking for you specifically. And you decided to involve yourself." It wasn't quite a question, but I answered anyway. Someone had to. His hand tightened fractionally on my waist. "Foolish. Probably." A sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been something darker, rumbled in his chest. "What's your name?" "Clara. Clara." He repeated it like he was tasting the word. "I'm going to move us toward the main entrance. Stay close. If anything happens..." I know. I did know. If things went wrong, I'd be the first casualty, the weak human shield that meant nothing in the grand scheme of things. But I'd made my choice. We moved together, his arms still around me, our steps casual and unhurried despite the danger stalking us through the crowd. I could see the hunters now, tracking us with predatory focus. One had his hand fully inside his jacket. Another whispered into a communication device. They were coordinating. We were 10 feet from the main doors when everything fell apart. The first hunter moved with startling speed, closing the distance between us before I could even process what was happening. The king's grip on me shifted instantly, no longer the intimate hold of a lover, but the iron grasp of a protector positioning a liability. He pushed me behind him in one fluid motion, his body becoming a wall between me and the threat. "Everyone down!" The hunter's voice cracked through the air like a whip, and suddenly the room erupted into chaos. Screams pierced the elegant atmosphere as guests realized what was happening. The orchestra's music died in a discordant screech. Crystal glasses shattered against marble as people scrambled for exits, their formal wear and practiced dignity forgotten in the face of real danger. But the king didn't move. He stood perfectly still, radiating a menace so palpable I could taste it on my tongue like copper. The hunter had drawn his weapon now, something silver that gleamed in the chandelier light, designed specifically for creatures like us. Blessed bullets, probably. The kind that didn't just harm, but poisoned, made shifting impossible, turned our greatest strength into agony. "The mighty Alpha King," the hunter sneered, his weapon trained on the king's chest. His 2 companions had spread out, flanking us, cutting off escape routes. "Not so untouchable after all, are you? Did you really think you could hide among these sheep without us finding you?" "I wasn't hiding." The king's voice was calm, almost bored, as if he were discussing the weather rather than staring down his own demise. "Hiding implies fear," I don't fear humans. You should. The hunter's finger moved toward the trigger. Your kind has terrorized ours for centuries. Tonight, that ends. Tonight, we cut off the head of the snake. I felt the king's muscles coil, preparing to strike, but the angles were wrong. Even with his supernatural speed, even with all his power, he couldn't reach all 3 hunters before at least one shot landed. And in this crowd, with panicking guests still scrambling for exits, stray bullets would find innocent targets. My mind raced. The hunters were focused entirely on the king, their weapons tracking his every breath. They dismissed me completely, the pale, unremarkable woman cowering behind the monster they'd come to eliminate. In their eyes, I was already a victim, probably his next meal, certainly not a threat. They'd made a mistake. I didn't think. Thinking would have made me freeze, would have reminded me that I was nobody special, that I had no training for this, that my intervention would likely get me killed. Instead, I let instinct take over. That same reckless impulse that had made me approach the king in the first place. I grabbed the champagne bottle from the nearest abandoned table and swung it with every ounce of strength I possessed at the closest hunter's head. The bottle connected with a sickening crack. Glass exploded. The hunter staggered, his weapon discharging wildly toward the ceiling. Plaster rained down as the gunshot echoed like thunder through the grand hall. Everything happened at once. The king moved like lightning, like violence given form. He was on the first hunter before the man could recover, disarming him with brutal efficiency. Bones cracked. The weapon skittered across the marble floor. The second hunter tried to adjust his aim, but the king was already there, a blur of controlled fury that was both terrifying and mesmerizing to witness. The third hunter, the one who'd spoken, turned his weapon toward me. Time slowed. I saw his eyes, cold, calculating, already convinced of his righteousness, saw his finger tightening on the trigger, saw my own demise reflected in the barrel of his gun. Strange, the clarity that came in that moment, not my life flashing before my eyes, but a simple, quiet observation. I was about to end, and I'd never even really begun. Then the king was between us, moving faster than should have been possible, and the gunshot that would have ended me buried itself in his shoulder instead. He didn't even flinch. His hand closed around the hunter's throat, lifting him off the ground with terrifying ease. "You pointed a weapon at her," he said, his voice carrying a quality that made my wolf press flat in submission, made every instinct scream danger. That was unwise. What happened next? I turned away from. Heard rather than saw. The sounds were enough to know that the threat was being eliminated, that justice or vengeance or whatever the king called it was being served. When the silence fell again, heavy and complete, I forced myself to look. The 3 hunters lay motionless on the ground. The king stood over them, his shoulder bleeding but his expression unchanged. Still cold, still empty, as if he'd done nothing more strenuous than swat away flies. Around us, the grand hall had cleared almost entirely. Only a few pack leaders remained, their guards positioned protectively, their faces showing varying degrees of shock and calculation. The king's eyes found mine across the carnage. "You're hurt," I said stupidly. Because what else was there to say? "Thank you for taking a bullet for me? Sorry I got you shot?" Nothing seemed adequate. "It's nothing." He rolled his shoulder experimentally, and I watched, horrified and fascinated, as the wound began to close itself, his healing already working to push the bullet out. "Silver core, not pure silver. It'll be gone by morning." "That's good." "You attacked an armed hunter with a champagne bottle." "Yes." That was profoundly stupid. "Probably," I agreed, my voice steadier than I felt. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline crashing through me in waves. But it worked. Something flickered in his expression. Not quite a smile, but not the empty coldness either. It did. He moved toward me, his steps measured, giving me time to retreat if I wanted. I didn't move. When he reached me, his hand came up to cut my face, tilting my head back so he could study me properly. Why? Why what? Why warn me? Why involve yourself? You could have walked away. Should have walked away. His thumb brushed my cheekbone, the touch surprisingly gentle from someone who'd just dispensed brutal justice. I'm a stranger to you, a king you owe no loyalty to. So why risk yourself? The honest answer lodged in my throat. Because I saw your loneliness and recognized it as my own. Because someone had to, and everyone else was too concerned with politics and self-preservation. Because I'm tired of being invisible, and for one moment, I wanted to matter. Instead, I said, it was the right thing to do. He studied me for a long moment, those dark eyes searching for something I wasn't sure I possessed. Then he stepped back, his hand falling away, leaving my skin cold where his warmth had been. You should leave, he said quietly, before questions are asked that I can't answer for you. What will happen now? I gestured to the fallen hunters, to the destruction around us. The summit will continue. This changes nothing. His expression hardened again, the momentary softness vanishing behind walls of ice. Hunters have tried to eliminate me before. They'll try again. It's the nature of what we are, predators breeding fear in those who can't understand us. They called you a monster. I am a monster. He said it simply, without emotion, as if reciting an established fact. I've done monstrous things to maintain order, to keep our kind safe from both external threats and our own self-destructive nature. Tonight was mercy, compared to what I'm capable of. I should have been afraid, should have taken his advice and fled while I still could. But that quality my mother had named, that curse of seeing too much, showed me the truth beneath his words. He believed what he said, believed himself irredeemable, had convinced himself that the loneliness was deserved, that the isolation was necessary. I knew that prison, lived in a smaller version of it myself. Thank you, I said softly, for taking that bullet, for protecting me when you didn't have to. You warned me first. I was merely returning the favor. Still, thank you. He nodded once, dismissive, already turning away. The other pack leaders were approaching now, their expressions concerned and calculating in equal measure. I recognized the shift in atmosphere. The king was about to be consumed by politics and obligations, and my presence would only complicate matters. I slipped away through the garden doors, my heart still racing, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The night air hit my face like a blessing, cool and clean after the chaos of the grand hall. My dress was ruined, splattered with champagne and other things I didn't want to examine too closely. My hands still trembled, but I was alive. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt something other than invisible. The next morning arrived with cruel brightness, sunlight pouring through my small window like an accusation. I woke tangled in sheets, my body aching in ways that had nothing to do with physical injury and everything to do with tension finally releasing. For a moment, I lay there, wondering if the previous night had been some kind of fever dream. Then I saw the ruined dress draped over my chair, and reality crashed back. I'd saved the Alpha King's life, or at least I'd tried to. Had attacked armed hunters with nothing but a champagne bottle and reckless courage, had been held by him, protected by him, studied by him like I was something worth examining. And today, I'd have to face the consequences. My mother was waiting in the kitchen when I finally emerged, her face tight with worry. Clara, sit down. I'm fine, Mother. Sit down. The command in her voice was unusual enough to make me obey. She set a cup of tea in front of me, her hands shaking slightly. The whole summit is talking about what happened. About the hunters, about the king, about... She paused, her eyes meeting mine. About you. My stomach dropped. What are they saying? That you threw yourself between the Alpha King and certain death. That you attacked armed men to protect him. That he... She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. That he seemed to know you, called you darling, held you like you were precious. It was an act, I said quickly. A deception to avoid alerting the hunters. Nothing more. Was it? My mother's gaze was penetrating, seeing through my deflection with ease. Clara, people are drawing conclusions. Dangerous conclusions. Cassandra has been spreading rumors that you've somehow seduced the king, that you're using dark arts or manipulation. That's ridiculous. Of course it is, but ridiculous doesn't matter when powerful people decide to believe it. She gripped my hand across the table. The king is meeting with pack leaders today, making decisions about security, about hunters, about connections formed during the attack. Your name is being mentioned. You need to be careful. Careful. I'd spent my entire life being careful. And where had it gotten me? Invisible. Dismissed. A disappointment to my pack and a burden to my mother. What would you have me do? The question came out sharper than intended. Apologize for not letting him get shot. Explain that I'm nobody special, that my interference meant nothing. I would have you survive. My mother's voice cracked. These are dangerous waters, Clara. The king isn't someone you can simply help and walk away from. He's complicated, powerful, and power destroys people like us who aren't prepared for it. Before I could respond, a knock sounded at our door, sharp, authoritative, not the casual tap of a neighbor or friend. My mother and I exchanged glances. She rose slowly, her shoulders squaring in a way that reminded me she'd once been stronger, before my father's loss had broken something in her. She opened the door to reveal a man in formal attire bearing the crest of the Northern Territory, the King's Seal. Clara Westfall? His voice was professional, devoid of emotion. You're summoned to appear before the Alpha King. Immediately. The Northern Territory's temporary headquarters occupied the entire east wing of the summit complex, a testament to the king's power and the deference shown to him by other packs. I was escorted through corridors that grew progressively quieter and more guarded, each checkpoint manned by wolves whose eyes tracked my every movement with predatory focus. They weren't hostile exactly, but they radiated the kind of controlled threat that made my instincts scream to submit, to make myself smaller, to disappear. I refused to hunch my shoulders. Whatever was coming, I would face it with my spine straight and my chin up. It was a lesson my father had taught me before he'd left for that final, fatal mission. Dignity costs nothing and can never be taken from you, only surrendered. The messenger who'd collected me from my home said nothing during the walk, offering no hints about what awaited me. My mother had wanted to come, had insisted it was her right as my guardian, but the messenger had been firm. The summons was for me alone. The last thing I'd seen before leaving was her face, pale and frightened, watching from our doorway like she was already mourning. We stopped before a set of double doors carved with intricate designs, wolves running beneath a full moon, their forms flowing into each other in an endless chase. The guards stationed there nodded to my escort, then pushed the doors open. The room beyond was configured as a study, though it dwarfed any workspace I'd ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the mountain range beyond the summit grounds. Early morning light painting the peaks in shades of gold and amber. Maps covered one wall, marked with territories and boundaries I could only partially decipher. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its surface organized with military precision. And behind that desk, studying a document with absolute focus, sat the Alpha King. He looked different in daylight, less like a creature of nightmare, and more like a man who carried the weight of impossible decisions. His dark hair was still damp, suggesting a recent shower, and he'd changed into simple clothes. A black shirt rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with scars that spoke of battles survived. The wound from last night was completely gone, healed as if it had never existed. He didn't look up immediately, and I stood there feeling increasingly foolish, wondering if I should announce myself or wait in silence. The messenger had disappeared, closing the doors behind me, leaving me alone with a man who could break me with one hand and who had absolutely no reason to tolerate my continued existence. Sit. The command was soft but absolute. I moved to the chair facing his desk, grateful that my legs still functioned despite the trembling that had started in my core. Up close, I could see the shadows under his eyes, suggesting he'd slept as poorly as I had. The document he'd been reviewing bore official seals from multiple packs. Something important, clearly, that my interruption had pulled him away from. He set the paper aside and finally met my gaze. The impact of his full attention was staggering. Those dark eyes held intelligence and calculation, but also something I hadn't expected. Curiosity. He studied me the way a scholar might examine an unexpected variable in a familiar equation, trying to determine if I was significant or merely anomalous. Clara Westfall. He spoke my name with the same careful pronunciation he'd used last night, like he was committing it to memory. Do you know why you're here? To be questioned about last night? Partially. He leaned back in his chair, his posture deceptively relaxed. Tell me what you remember. Everything. From the moment you first noticed the hunters, so I did. I recounted the evening in as much detail as I could recall, the timing of the hunters' arrival, their positioning, the way they'd scanned the crowd with clear intent. I described my decision to approach him, though I couldn't adequately explain the impulse that had driven me. When I reached the part where I'd attacked the hunter with the bottle, something that might have been amusement flickered across his expression. You have no combat training, he observed. It wasn't a question. None. No special abilities, enhanced strength, prophetic visions, anything that might explain your actions. I'm completely ordinary, I said, and hated how the words tasted like failure on my tongue. No gifts, no notable bloodline. Just aware, I suppose. I noticed things other people miss. You noticed an ambush that 36 trained warriors failed to detect. He tilted his head slightly, studying me from a new angle. That's considerably more than ordinary. They weren't looking for it. Everyone was too focused on politics and alliances. The hunters were wrong, out of place. It was obvious if you were paying attention. And you were paying attention. He stood, moving around the desk with fluid grace, and I fought the urge to press back into my chair as he approached. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. Why? Why was I paying attention? Why do you notice things others miss? Why involve yourself when doing nothing would have been safer? Why risk yourself for a stranger? His voice dropped lower, more intense. Why do you care? The questions hit like arrows, each one finding a tender place I'd tried to protect, because caring was all I knew how to do, even when it hurt me. Because being invisible meant watching the world unfold around me, learning to read the spaces between words and actions. Because loneliness taught observation the way hunger taught hunting. Someone had to, I said finally, the same inadequate answer I'd given last night. No. He moved closer, and now I could smell him, pine and snow and something wild that made my wolf stir with interest and caution in equal measure. Someone had to means everyone should. You're not everyone, Clara. You're one small woman from a struggling pack with everything to lose and nothing to gain. Try again. I don't have a better answer, my hands clenched in my lap, frustration bleeding through. I saw you were in danger and I reacted. If you're looking for some grand motive or hidden agenda, you'll be disappointed. I'm exactly what I appear to be, unremarkable and forgettable. Someone who made an impulsive decision that somehow didn't get her killed. Unremarkable. He repeated the word like it offended him. Is that what you believe? It's what everyone believes. It's what the evidence suggests. The evidence. He laughed, a sound without humor. The evidence suggests you have more courage than wolves twice your size. That you assess threats faster than trained guards. That you act while others freeze. He paused. That you see things in people they try to hide. My breath caught. What do you mean? Last night, when you first approached me, you said something. Trust me. Why would you assume I wouldn't? His eyes bored into mine, searching. What did you see in me that made you think I'd listen to a stranger's warning? The memory surfaced. That moment before everything went wrong, when I'd looked at the most powerful alpha in our world and seen the same aching isolation that haunted my own reflection. I couldn't tell him that. Couldn't expose that vulnerability in both of us. I didn't think, I said carefully. I just hoped. Hoped. He studied me for another long moment, then moved back to his desk, creating distance that let me breathe again. The other pack leaders are demanding an explanation for last night. They want to know how hunters penetrated Summit security. They want to know who you are and what connection you have to me. My stomach dropped. I have no connection to you. You do now. He picked up another document, this one bearing fresh ink. Witnesses saw us together, heard me call you darling, watched me protect you. In their eyes, you're either my weakness or my asset. Either way, you've become politically relevant whether you wanted to or not. I never wanted. I know. He cut me off, not unkindly. But wanting doesn't change reality. There are wolves in this building who would eliminate you just to send me a message, others who would try to use you as leverage, and some who would simply remove what they perceive as a distraction I can't afford. Fear crystallized in my chest, cold and sharp. So what happens to me? That depends. He set the document down, his expression unreadable. I can send you back to your pack with a story that diminishes your involvement, make you forgettable again, erase the connection in everyone's minds. You'd be safe, invisible, exactly what you claim to want. Or you stay close. Let everyone believe the connection is real, that you matter to me. His eyes locked on mine. It would be dangerous. You'd be a target, but you'd also be under my protection, which means anyone who touched you would answer to me personally. Why would you do that? The question emerged as barely more than a whisper. Why protect someone you don't know? You saved my life. You said yourself you would have survived. I would have. He moved back around the desk, eliminating the distance between us again. This time when he stopped, he was close enough to touch, to reach out and bridge the space that separated us. But you didn't know that when you acted. You saw danger, and you intervened, expecting nothing in return. That kind of selflessness is rare. In my world, everyone wants something. Everyone has an angle, except you. Maybe I'm just better at hiding my motives. You're terrible at hiding anything. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Your face shows everything you're thinking. Right now, you're terrified, but trying not to show it. You want to run, but you're forcing yourself to stay. You think I'm offering you a cage disguised as protection. He wasn't wrong. If I stay, I said slowly, what would you expect from me? The truth. Always. His hand lifted, hovering near my face but not quite touching. I'm surrounded by wolves who tell me what they think I want to hear. Who calculate every word for maximum advantage. You don't do that. You speak plainly, act honestly. That's worth more than you realize. I'm not brave, I confessed. Last night was... I don't know what it was. Madness, maybe. I can't promise I'd be useful to you. You already have been. His hand finally made contact, his fingers gentle against my jaw, tilting my face up. And bravery isn't the absence of fear, Clara. It's acting despite it. You've already proven you can do that. The door burst open. We sprang apart like guilty children, though we'd been doing nothing wrong. A man entered without announcement. Tall, broad, with sandy hair and eyes that held barely contained fury. He wore the markings of a high-ranking pack member, Beta at least, and the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. My king. His voice dripped with false courtesy. I apologize for the interruption, but the council is convening early. They're demanding your presence. Something about the incident last night requiring immediate attention. Tell them I'll be there shortly, Ronan. They were quite insistent. Ronan's eyes slid to me, assessment and dismissal in one glance. Shall I escort your guest out while you prepare? No. The king's voice hardened. Clara stays. My king. Surely it's inappropriate for a pack member of such low standing to be present during council matters. I don't recall asking your opinion on what's appropriate, Beta. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. When I want your input, I'll request it. Until then, your job is to follow orders. Am I clear? Ronan's jaw clenched, but he bowed his head. Crystal, my king. Good. Now leave us. The Beta retreated, but not before shooting me a look that promised this wasn't over. When the door closed behind him, I released a breath I hadn't known I was holding. He hates me, I observed. He doesn't know you well enough to hate you. He hates what you represent. The king moved to a cabinet, extracting a folder marked with red seals. Classified information clearly. Change. Disruption. Someone who hasn't been properly vetted entering my circle. Ronan values order and hierarchy above all else. And you don't? I value effectiveness, results, loyalty earned rather than demanded. He turned back to me, folder in hand. The council is going to ask about you. About last night. I need to know. Can you handle that kind of scrutiny? The questions will be invasive, and the wolves asking them will be looking for any sign of weakness. My throat felt dry. I don't know. Honest answer. Something like approval flickered in his expression. Here's what I propose. You accompany me to the council meeting. Not as a participant, but as an observer. Let them see that I value your presence. After that, you decide. Stay under my protection, or return to your pack with a cover story that keeps you safe. You'd let me choose? I'm not in the habit of keeping anyone against their will, Clara. His voice softened slightly. Whatever you decide, I'll honor it. But decide knowing that if you walk away, I can't protect you from the consequences of last night. And there will be consequences. It wasn't really a choice then. Stay and face danger head on, or leave and face it alone. I thought of my mother's frightened face, my pack's dismissive treatment, Cassandra's cruel words, a lifetime of being invisible, of watching important things happen to other people while I remained safely, miserably irrelevant. I'll stay, I said. For now. The king's smile was small but genuine. Then let's go remind the council why questioning my judgment is inadvisable. He offered his arm like a gentleman escorting a lady to dinner, rather than a king bringing an outsider to a meeting of the most powerful wolves in our world. I hesitated only a moment before taking it, feeling the strength in him, the barely contained power that thrummed beneath his skin. As we left the study and moved through corridors now crowded with curious onlookers, I realized I'd just made a decision that would change everything. There was no going back to invisible after this. No returning to the safety of obscurity. For better or worse, I'd chosen to matter. The council chamber was built to intimidate. Circular, with tiered seating that rose toward a domed ceiling painted with constellations, it reminded me of ancient amphitheaters where gladiators fought for their lives while spectators judged from safety. Except here, the spectators were alpha pack leaders, their betas and advisors, representatives from the oldest bloodlines, wolves who commanded thousands and answered to no one except the king, whose arm I still clutched like a lifeline. Every eye turned to us as we entered. The weight of their collective attention was suffocating. I felt my wolf press flat in submission, overwhelmed by the concentrated power in this room. These weren't ordinary wolves playing at authority. These were the apex predators of our world. And I was a field mouse who'd somehow wandered into their den. The king's hand covered mine where it rested on his arm, a subtle squeeze of reassurance or warning. I couldn't tell which. His expression remained impassive as he guided me to the center of the chamber, where 2 chairs sat elevated above the rest. One was clearly his, massive, carved from dark wood, bearing the Northern Territory's crest. The other was smaller, but no less ornate, positioned slightly behind and to the right of his. A queen's chair. My steps faltered. He felt the hesitation and leaned close, his voice for my ears only. Sit. Say nothing unless directly addressed. And Clara, don't show fear. They can smell it, and they will use it. I wanted to tell him I was drowning in fear, that every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to make myself small enough that these predators might forget I existed. Instead, I lifted my chin and moved to the smaller chair, settling into it with as much grace as I could manufacture. The king took his seat beside me, and the room seemed to exhale collectively. We are convened. The king's voice carried effortlessly through the chamber, silencing the whispers that had started the moment we entered. I understand there are concerns about last night's incident. Speak freely. A woman rose from the second tier, silver-haired, elegant, wearing authority like a second skin. I recognized her from summit introductions as Alpha Moira of the Eastern Shores, one of the oldest and most influential packs. Her eyes, sharp as broken glass, fixed on me before sliding to the king. Your Majesty, I believe I speak for many present when I say we're confused by certain developments. Her voice was cultured, precise. 3 hunters infiltrated Summit security and attempted to assassinate you. This is deeply troubling and demands investigation. However, equally troubling is the presence of an unknown female who apparently has access to your private quarters and now sits beside you in council. Clara Westfall is not unknown, the king replied calmly. She's a member of the Riverside delegation. A delta, Moira interrupted, the word carrying unmistakable disdain. Forgive me, Your Majesty, but the presence of someone so insignificant at your side raises questions. What exactly is her role? What claim does she have to sit where queens have sat? The chamber erupted in murmurs. I felt my face heat, shame and anger warring in my chest. Insignificant. There it was again, the word that had defined me my entire life, now spoken aloud by someone whose opinion could shape policy across territories. Her role, the king said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that made my spine straighten, is none of your concern, Alpha Moira. However, since you've raised the question publicly, I'll address it once. He paused, letting silence build. Clara Westfall saved my life last night. While trained warriors failed to detect the threat, she identified it, warned me, and engaged armed hunters to protect me. Her courage and quick thinking prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss. That is her claim to sit beside me. A convenient story, another voice called out. Male, rough, coming from a pack leader I didn't recognize. How do we know she wasn't part of the attack? Perhaps she arranged it with the hunters, positioned herself to appear heroic, all to gain your favor and access to power? My stomach dropped. I hadn't considered that angle, hadn't imagined anyone would twist my actions into something so calculated and vile. But looking around the chamber, I saw the idea taking root in various expressions. It made a perverse kind of sense to minds trained in political maneuvering. The perfect infiltration, using the king's own honor against him. If that were true, I heard myself say, my voice steadier than I felt, it would be the stupidest plan imaginable. The king's hand moved to the armrest between us. A warning or support, I couldn't tell. But I'd already spoken, and now dozens of powerful wolves were staring at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. Alpha Moira's eyebrow arched. Please enlighten us. I stood, my legs somehow solid beneath me despite the trembling in my core. If I was going to be condemned, I'd do it on my feet. You think I arranged for 3 armed hunters to attack the Alpha King? Gambling that I could warn him in time, that he'd trust a complete stranger, that I could successfully fight trained killers, and that all of this would somehow endear me to the most powerful wolf in our world? I shook my head. There are at least a dozen ways that plan fails catastrophically. I'd be dead, or imprisoned, or executed for treason. What could I possibly gain that would be worth that risk? Power, Moira said simply. The kind of power that comes from capturing a king's attention. From sitting where you sit now. I don't want power. The words emerged with more force than I intended. I never asked to be here. I warned him because it was the right thing to do. Because watching someone get hurt when I could prevent it isn't something I'm capable of ignoring. If that makes me stupid or suspicious in your eyes, then fine. But don't insult me by pretending I'm clever enough to orchestrate some elaborate scheme. I'm exactly what I appear to be. Someone who made an impulsive decision that somehow didn't end in disaster. Silence fell across the chamber. I just contradicted an alpha, spoken out of turn, made myself even more of a target. But something fierce had awakened in my chest, something that refused to bow under the weight of their judgment. She has spirit, a new voice observed, warm, almost amused. A man rose from the 3rd tier, younger than most present, with copper hair and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I'm inclined to believe her, actually. The plan she described is indeed idiotic. But her actions last night? Quick thinking under pressure, selfless intervention. These are qualities we should celebrate, not interrogate with suspicion. Alpha Garrett makes a fair point, another voice added. Female, thoughtful. Perhaps we're looking at this situation backwards. The hunters who attacked last night were professionals. They had inside information about security protocols, about the king's schedule. That's the real threat. Not this girl who happened to notice what our own guards missed. The tide was shifting. I could feel it. Not everyone was convinced of my innocence, but enough doubt had been introduced that the accusations were losing momentum. The king had remained silent throughout, letting me defend myself, letting the council see me as something other than a pawn in his games. Ronan, the beta who'd interrupted us earlier, stood from his position near the king's chair. If I may, Your Majesty, regardless of Miss Westfall's intentions, her continued presence poses a security risk. She's unvetted, unprotected by any significant pack bonds. Perhaps it would be wise to place her under supervised protection while we investigate last night's events more thoroughly. It was smoothly done, framed as concern for my safety while actually suggesting imprisonment. The king's expression didn't change, but I felt the temperature drop. Beta Ronin. The king's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. Are you suggesting I'm incapable of protecting someone under my care? Not at all, Your Majesty. I merely suggest that spreading our resources to guard an outsider might be unwise when threats clearly exist within our own ranks. Then let me be perfectly clear. The king stood, and every wolf in the chamber responded instinctively, straightening, paying attention. Clara Westfall is under my direct protection. Anyone who threatens her, questions her loyalty without evidence, or attempts to remove her from my presence will answer to me personally. Her safety is now a matter of my honor. Is that understood? The declaration rippled through the chamber like a shockwave. By tying his honor to my protection, he'd made me untouchable. But he'd also made me a symbol, a test of his authority. Challenging me now meant challenging him directly. Alpha Moira's expression tightened, but she bowed her head. Understood, Your Majesty. Others echoed the acknowledgement, though not all looked pleased about it. I saw calculation in various faces. Wolves already planning how to use this new dynamic to their advantage. The king wasn't finished. Now, regarding last night's actual security failure. Alpha Garrett, your pack oversees summit protection this year. Explain how 3 hunters entered undetected. The copper-haired Alpha's easy smile faded. We're investigating, Your Majesty. Preliminary evidence suggests they had help from the inside, someone with access to patrol schedules and checkpoint rotations. A traitor. The word hung heavy in the air, in your ranks or elsewhere. We don't know yet. The hunters themselves provided no useful information before they expired, meaning the king had killed them too quickly for interrogation. I remembered the sounds from last night, the finality of it, and suppressed a shiver. Find them. The king's command was absolute. I want every pack member who had access to security protocols investigated. I want communications monitored. I want the traitor's identity within 48 hours. And if the investigation points to multiple packs? Moira asked carefully. If this conspiracy extends beyond summit security, then we have a bigger problem than 3 dead hunters. The king's eyes swept the chamber. Someone in this room, or someone they trust, wanted me eliminated. Until we know who, everyone is suspect. Council sessions will continue under enhanced security. Pack delegations will be confined to their assigned territories, except during official events, and any pack leader who objects to these restrictions can consider their loyalty questioned. It was a lockdown disguised as protocol. Trap the conspirators by limiting their movements and communications. Smart, but also dangerous. Caged predators became desperate predators. The session continued for another hour, devolving into logistics and arguments about security measures. I remained silent in my chair, hyper-aware of every glance thrown my way, every whispered conversation that might be about me. By the time the king dismissed the council, my nerves were scraped raw. We walked back to his study in heavy silence, guards trailing at a respectful distance. Only when the doors closed behind us did I allow myself to sag against the nearest wall, exhaustion crashing over me in waves. You did well, the king said quietly. I contradicted an alpha, spoke without permission, made myself an even bigger target. You defended yourself with logic and honesty. That's more than most wolves in that chamber can claim. He moved to his desk, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He offered one to me. You're shaking. I'm terrified, I admitted, taking the glass. The liquor burned going down, but the warmth helped steady me. They hate me. They think I'm using you, or that I'm a security risk, or that I'm just insignificant debris that somehow landed in the wrong place. They don't know what to make of you. That's different from hate. He drained his own glass, setting it down with careful precision. You confuse their worldview. Someone with no power, no status, no obvious ambition, who nevertheless acted with courage when it mattered. It doesn't fit their understanding of how wolves behave. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am just lucky debris. You saved my life, Clara. He moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. Luck didn't do that. Courage did. Compassion did. The ability to see what others missed and act on it despite the risk. And now I'm trapped. The words escaped before I could stop them. You've tied your honor to my protection, which means I can't leave without making you look weak. I can't go home, can't return to being invisible. Whatever I was before last night is gone. Is that what you want? To go back? I thought about my small room, my mother's worried face, Cassandra's cruel dismissals. Thought about being overlooked and underestimated, about watching life happen to other people while I remained safely, miserably irrelevant. No, I whispered. But I don't know how to be what you need me to be either. I don't need you to be anything except yourself. His hand lifted to my face, thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. The council saw what I see, someone real in a world of performances. That's rare enough to be precious, or dangerous. Often the same thing. His smile was slight, but genuine. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps. For now, you're safe. A guard escorted me to quarters that had been prepared, a suite that dwarfed my entire home, with windows overlooking the mountains and furniture that cost more than my pack's annual income. It should have felt like a dream. Instead, it felt like a beautiful cage. I stood at the window as night fell, watching lights flicker to life across the summit complex. Somewhere out there, wolves were plotting, investigating, deciding if I was an asset or a liability. And tomorrow I'd have to face them again. Pretend I belonged in a world I'd never been prepared for. My reflection stared back at me from the darkening glass, pale hair, unremarkable features, eyes that showed too much fear. The girl who'd attacked hunters with a champagne bottle seemed like a stranger now. Had that really been me, that moment of reckless courage? A knock interrupted my spiraling thoughts. I opened the door to find a young woman holding folded clothes, simple but well-made, in my size somehow. Compliments of His Majesty, she said shyly. He thought you might need something more comfortable than summit formal wear, and he asked me to tell you that guards are posted outside your door, for your protection, not to keep you in. The distinction mattered. A cage with open doors was still a choice, even if leaving meant danger. Thank you, I managed. She left, and I was alone again with expensive clothes and questions that had no good answers. I changed mechanically, my body going through motions while my mind raced ahead to tomorrow, to council sessions and investigations and the weight of eyes that saw me as threat or opportunity but never just me. Sleep, when it finally came, was restless and full of dark dreams where I ran through endless corridors, while shadows whispered accusations I couldn't quite hear. 3 weeks had passed since the council meeting that changed everything. 3 weeks of living in a world I'd never imagined belonging to, of learning to navigate political currents that could drown me if I misstepped. The investigation into the Hunter attack had uncovered a conspiracy that reached further than anyone expected. Pack members from 4 different territories working together, united by fear of what the king represented. They'd been caught, judged, and dealt with in ways I tried not to think about too carefully. But the threat hadn't ended with their capture. If anything, it had multiplied. Now I wasn't just the woman who'd saved the king. I was the woman he'd chosen to keep close, to protect publicly, to trust in ways that made other wolves nervous. Rumors had evolved from suspicion to speculation, to something more dangerous, belief. People whispered that I was his mate, his chosen queen, the weakness that enemies could exploit. None of it was true, but truth mattered less than perception in this world. I stood in the king's private training grounds, watching him spar with 3 of his elite guards simultaneously. It had become my routine these past weeks. Mornings spent observing, afternoons in strategy sessions where I was expected to offer perspectives that others missed, evenings navigating dinners with pack leaders who smiled while calculating how to use me. The king moved like poetry written in violence, each strike precise and devastating. His opponents were skilled, but they fought like they feared hurting him. He noticed, he always noticed, and called them out on it with harsh words that made them fight harder. Still not hard enough to truly challenge him, though. Loneliness in different forms, I thought. Mine came from being invisible. His from being so powerful that no one could stand beside him as an equal. You're thinking too loud, I startled. Ronan had approached silently, his expression unreadable as always. The beta had made his disapproval of my presence clear through 1,000 small gestures, though never overtly enough to justify the king's intervention. He was too smart for direct confrontation. Just observing, I said carefully, as you always do. He moved to stand beside me, watching the king finish his training session with a move that sent all 3 guards sprawling. Tell me, Clara, what do you see when you look at him? The question felt like a trap. I see someone who carries tremendous responsibility. Diplomatic answer. Ronan's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'll tell you what I see. I see a king who's been alone so long he's forgotten what it means to need someone. And now you're here, disrupting that carefully maintained isolation. Do you understand what that means? He doesn't need me, I said quietly. I'm just here. You're not just anything, and you know it. Ronan's voice lowered. He laughs at your observations. Seeks your counsel on matters he'd normally decide alone. Defends you against pack leaders who outrank you by every measure. You've become something he can't afford, a vulnerability. I never asked to be. No one asks to matter. They just do. And then everyone else has to deal with the consequences. He paused. There are wolves who would eliminate you to protect him from himself. They'd consider it a service to the realm, removing a distraction before it becomes a liability. A fear crystallized in my chest. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. His expression shifted, becoming almost gentle. I've served him for 15 years, Clara. I've watched him bear burdens that would break lesser wolves. I've seen him sacrifice everything. Peace, happiness, the possibility of normalcy. To keep our kind safe. And in all that time, I've never seen him vulnerable. Until you. The king was approaching now, having dismissed his sparring partners. His shirt clung to his shoulders, damp with exertion, and his eyes found mine immediately. Checking, always checking, as if he expected me to have vanished in the moments he wasn't watching. Ronan. His voice held a question. Something you need? Just checking on security protocols, Your Majesty. There's been word of unrest in the Western Territories. Nothing immediate, but worth monitoring. See to it. The dismissal was clear. Ronan bowed and left, but not before shooting me one last meaningful look. What did he say to you? The king asked once we were alone. That I make you vulnerable. I met his gaze steadily. Is he right? He was silent for a long moment, studying me with that intensity that still made my breath catch. Come with me. There's something I want to show you. He led me through corridors I'd never explored, down stone steps that descended deep beneath the summit complex. The air grew cooler, older, carrying the weight of centuries. We emerged into a cavern lit by bioluminescent moss, its walls covered in ancient markings, the history of our kind, written by the first packs who'd learned to shift between forms. This is the heart, he said quietly, where the first Alpha King was chosen, where every king since has come to remember why we exist, why we lead. The carvings told stories of chaos, wolves tearing each other apart, territories burning, children left orphaned by endless wars. And then, a single figure emerging, strong enough to command peace, wise enough to enforce it without destroying the freedom that made wolves what they were. We exist to prevent this. His hand traced one of the carvings. A mother grieving over fallen pups. To be strong enough that others don't have to be. To carry the burden of violence, so our people can live without fear of it. He turned to face me. That's why I can't afford vulnerabilities, Clara. Not because I fear for myself, but because if enemies can hurt me through someone I care about, everything I've built becomes fragile. Then send me away. The words hurt to speak, but I forced them out. If I'm a weakness, eliminate me from the equation. Let me go home. I tried. His admission was so soft I almost missed it. That first night, after the council meeting, I told myself you'd served your purpose, saved my life, been rewarded with protection, could now return to your pack safely. I drafted the orders. Had Ronan prepare the escort. What stopped you? You did. He moved closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the wild scent that made my wolf whimper with want and submission. You stood in that council chamber and defended yourself with nothing but honesty. You didn't try to manipulate or seduce or play the political games everyone expected. You were just real. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time anyone had been real with me. My heart hammered against my ribs. So what am I to you? Really? I don't know. The confession seemed torn from him. I've never had this. Never wanted it. Caring about someone beyond their tactical value or political utility. It's not something kings are supposed to do. We're supposed to love our people collectively, not individually. Supposed to see the greater good, not one woman with pale hair and eyes that see too much. You barely know me. I know you attacked armed hunters to protect a stranger. I know you speak truth when lies would be easier. I know you watch people the way I watch territories, looking for the hidden dangers, the unspoken needs. His hand lifted to my face, cupping my jaw with surprising gentleness. I know that when you're near, the loneliness that's been my constant companion for 15 years fades. And that terrifies me more than any hunter or conspiracy ever could. Because it makes you vulnerable, because it makes me hope. His thumb brushed my cheekbone, and hope is the most dangerous thing a king can feel. I should have stepped back, should have maintained the distance that kept us both safe. Instead, I leaned into his touch, letting myself feel the warmth of his palm against my skin. The solid reality of someone seeing me, not as invisible or insignificant, but as myself. Ronan's right, I whispered. This is dangerous. Everything worthwhile is. He kissed me then, and the world narrowed to the press of his lips against mine, the strength in his arms as he pulled me closer, the way my body fit against his like we'd been designed for this exact configuration. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was claiming and desperate, the kiss of someone who'd denied himself connection for so long that now, allowed a taste of it, he couldn't hold back. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Uncertainty. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. How to be a king and also this. Whatever this is. Neither do I said honestly. I don't know how to be in your world, how to navigate politics and threats, and people who want me gone. I don't know if I'm strong enough for what loving you would require. Loving me? He repeated the words like they were foreign. What else would you call it? I challenged. When you think about someone constantly, when their safety matters more than your own, when their loneliness echoes your own so loudly you can't ignore it, what is that, if not the beginning of love? He stared at me, and for the first time since I'd met him, the ice in his expression cracked completely. What lay beneath was raw and vulnerable and achingly human, fear and hope and desperate longing all tangled together. I would call it, he said slowly, the most terrifying and necessary thing I've ever felt. A sound echoed from the entrance. Footsteps, running, urgent. We separated quickly, professional distance reasserting itself by instinct. One of the king's guards appeared, breathing hard. Your Majesty, we have a situation. Alpha Moira has called an emergency council session. She's claiming new evidence about the conspiracy. Something that involves Miss Westfall directly. Ice flooded my veins. What evidence? She wouldn't say, but she's demanded Clara be present to answer questions, publicly. The king's expression hardened back into the mask I'd first seen. Cold, controlled, dangerous. Tell Moira I'll be there shortly, and that she should choose her accusations carefully. The guard bowed and left. I stood frozen, mind racing through possibilities. What evidence could Moira possibly have? I'd done nothing except exist in proximity to power. No schemes, no conspiracies, nothing but trying to survive each day in a world I didn't belong to. It's a move, the king said, already analyzing. She's been maneuvering against me since the incident, trying to undermine my authority. Attacking you is attacking me. But indirectly enough that I can't retaliate without looking tyrannical. So what do? We face it. His hand found mine, squeezed once. Together. Whatever she has, whatever she claims, we face it and we survive it. That's what we do now. The council chamber felt different this time. Charged with anticipation, predatory excitement poorly masked as concern. Moira stood at the center, holding what appeared to be documents, her expression triumphant in a way that made my stomach drop. "Your Majesty." She bowed with exaggerated deference. "Thank you for convening on such short notice. I wouldn't have called this session if the matter weren't urgent. It concerns the loyalty and true intentions of Miss Clara Westfall." "State your evidence," the king commanded, his voice flat and dangerous. Moira held up the documents, communications between Miss Westfall's pack and known Hunter sympathizers, messages indicating that her pack has been feeding information about Summit security to outside sources. And most damning, a letter from her mother, discussing the possibility of placing Clara in a position of influence to gather intelligence. The chamber erupted in whispers. I stood frozen, my mind struggling to process the accusation. My mother? Conspiring with hunters? It was absurd, impossible. "Let me see those documents," the king demanded. Of course. Moira approached, offering them with a smile that didn't quite hide her satisfaction. He read in silence, his expression unreadable. Each second felt like an eternity. Finally, he looked up, his eyes finding mine across the distance. "Clara, did you know about any of this?" The question hit like a physical blow. He was asking publicly, forcing me to defend myself in front of the wolves who already wanted me gone. Smart, politically. It showed fairness, gave me a chance to speak. But it also revealed doubt. No. My voice came out steady despite the trembling in my limbs. I knew nothing about any communications with hunters. My mother wouldn't. She would never. Your mother is desperate, Moira interrupted smoothly, a widow trying to secure her daughter's future by any means necessary. Is it so hard to believe she'd make deals with dangerous people if she thought it would elevate you? It's not just hard to believe, I said, anger finally cutting through the shock. It's impossible. My mother hates hunters. They're the reason my father is dead. She would rather starve than ally with them. Noble words. But the evidence can be forged. A new voice cut through the chamber. Alpha Garrett, the copper-haired wolf who'd defended me before. He rose from his seat, expression thoughtful. Your Majesty, might I examine those documents? The king handed them over. Garrett studied them carefully, then motioned to one of his advisors, a small woman with clever eyes who produced a magnifying lens and began her own examination. Interesting, Garrett murmured. The seal on this letter is wrong. It bears your pack's mark, Clara, but the wax composition is off. Too new. These letters are supposedly months old, but this seal was made within the last week. Hope flared in my chest. Moira's expression tightened. Furthermore, Garrett's advisor added, the ink used here isn't available in Riverside Pack territory. It's a northern blend, expensive, used primarily by... She paused delicately. High-ranking officials in territories adjacent to the king's own lands. The implication hung heavy in the air. Someone with resources and access had created these forgeries, and that someone was likely in this very chamber. This is preposterous, Moira snapped. Are you suggesting I fabricated evidence? I'm suggesting, Garrett said calmly, that someone did. Whether that's you, or whether you were fed false information by the true conspirators, remains to be determined, but these documents are definitely forged. The king's expression could have frozen fire. Alpha Moira, you will submit to a formal investigation. Your movements over the past month, your communications, your contacts, all of it. If you've been manipulated, we'll discover who's responsible. If you've actively conspired against a member of my household, he let the threat hang unfinished. Moira's face paled. She'd overplayed her hand, revealed herself too soon. Whatever she'd planned, discrediting me, forcing the king to choose between protecting me and maintaining political balance, it had backfired spectacularly. I want my mother brought here, I said suddenly, surprising myself. Under safe escort, immediately. If these documents claim to represent her words, she deserves the right to face her accusers and defend herself. The king nodded. See to it. And Alpha Moira, you're confined to your quarters pending investigation. If you attempt to leave or communicate with outside contacts, it will be considered an admission of guilt. Guards moved to escort a protesting Moira from the chamber. Other pack leaders exchanged glances, recalculating alliances and risks. The political landscape had just shifted dramatically, and everyone was scrambling to adjust. The king dismissed the council shortly after, but asked me to remain. When we were alone except for 2 guards stationed by the doors, he finally allowed his controlled facade to crack. "I'm sorry." The words were quiet, but intense. "I shouldn't have doubted you publicly. Shouldn't have—" "You did what you had to do," I interrupted. "Gave me a chance to defend myself fairly. If you'd immediately dismissed the accusations, it would have looked like favoritism, made everything worse. Still, I saw the hurt in your eyes when I asked if you knew. For a second, I wondered if you believed I was capable of that kind of betrayal," I admitted. "But only a second. Then I remembered. You've been lied to and manipulated by people you trusted for years. Of course you'd verify before condemning. That's not doubt. That's wisdom." He pulled me into his arms, holding me with a desperation that spoke of fear finally released. If Garrett hadn't noticed the forgery. But he did. And the truth won. I pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "That's what matters. The truth keeps winning when I'm with you, because you create space for it. You don't silence accusers or rule through fear alone. You listen, investigate, and act on evidence. That's why you're a good king. I'm a king who almost lost you to political games, but you didn't." I touched his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. I'm still here, still standing, still choosing to stay despite how dangerous it is. Why? The question was agonized. Why stay when leaving would be safer? "Because loneliness kills slowly," I said simply. "And I'm tired of dying that way. I'd rather face danger with you than safety without you." The guards shifted uncomfortably, trying to pretend they weren't witnessing their king's vulnerability. He noticed and pulled back slightly, reasserting his composure. "Your mother will arrive tomorrow," he said, back to business. "We'll clear her name publicly, expose whoever created those forgeries. And then what?" His smile was slight but genuine. "And then we figure out how to be a king who loves someone, and a woman who loves a king, together. However messy and complicated that becomes. It will be very messy," I warned. "I'm counting on it." 2 months later, I stood in the same grand hall where everything had begun, but now I wore a dress that marked me as more than an invisible observer. The summit had concluded, and most packs had returned to their territories. My mother had been cleared of all accusations. The investigation had traced the forgeries back to a faction within Moira's own pack, wolves who'd acted without her knowledge but used her ambition as cover. Moira herself had been stripped of her alpha position, a harsh but necessary consequence. The king, my king now, in ways that transcended titles, stood beside me as we watched the last delegations prepare to depart. His hand found mine, a gesture we no longer hid. "Regrets?" he asked quietly. I thought about my old life, the invisibility, the safety of insignificance, the simple routines that had required nothing of me. Then I thought about who I'd become, someone who spoke in council sessions, who helped investigate conspiracies, who stood beside the most powerful wolf in our world, not as decoration, but as counsel. "No regrets." I squeezed his hand, though I reserve the right to complain when the politics get especially tedious. He laughed, a sound that still surprised me with its rarity and warmth. "Complain as much as you need. It keeps me grounded. That's my job now, keeping you grounded, among other things." His eyes held promises that made my pulse quicken, though I have a few ideas about other responsibilities you might enjoy more. "Your Majesty," Ronan interrupted, approaching with his usual perfect timing. His expression had softened toward me over the past weeks, acceptance, if not quite approval. "The final security reports are ready for your review, and Clara, your mother asked me to tell you she's prepared dinner. She insists you both join her tonight." My mother had adapted to the changes in my life with surprising grace. She'd moved to quarters near mine, found purpose in organizing charitable works across territories, and occasionally gave the king advice that he actually listened to. Their relationship had evolved into something like mutual respect, built on their shared investment in my well-being. We'll be there, I confirmed. Ronan nodded and left. The king turned back to me, his expression serious. There will be more challenges, he said. More wolves who resent your influence. More situations where we'll be tested. This isn't a fairy tale ending where everything becomes perfect. I know. I did know. Had learned it through weeks of navigating threats and politics and the constant pressure of living under scrutiny. But I also know that being alone was slowly destroying both of us. At least this way, whatever comes, we face it together. Together. He repeated the word like a vow. I never thought I'd have that. Never thought I deserved it. You didn't have to deserve it. You just had to be willing to let someone see past the crown to the person wearing it. I stood on my toes, pressing a kiss to his jaw. Lucky for you, I'm exceptionally good at seeing what others miss. Exceptionally lucky, he agreed, pulling me closer. Around us, the summit complex continued its organized chaos. Packs departing, territories being reinforced, the machinery of government churning forward. But in this moment, in his arms, I felt something I'd never experienced before. I felt home. Not in a place, but in a person. Not in safety, but in belonging. Not in invisibility, but in being seen, truly, completely seen, and choosing to stay visible despite the cost. The pale-haired girl who'd once hidden in corners was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. That love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone whose brokenness fit against yours in ways that made both of you stronger. And as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, I stood beside a king who'd learned to hope again, and felt the weight of a future full of challenges and possibilities stretching before us. Together we would face it all. Together we would survive it. Together we would build something that neither of us could have created alone. A love that existed not despite the danger and complexity of our world, but because of it. Because we'd both known loneliness deep enough to recognize its opposite when it finally appeared. The Alpha King who'd whispered a warning that saved my life had become the man whose life I'd choose to save every day in countless small ways. And that, I realized, was the real story. Not the dramatic rescue or the political intrigue, but the quiet, steady choice to keep choosing each other when walking away would be easier. That was the transformation that mattered. That was the ending that felt like a beginning.